Jack Dempsey's work at the Coast Guard in the early 2000s was excellent asset management before it was even a thing. And Jack introduced me to the Asset Leadership Network. So we always grateful for that. Jack was instrumental in connecting us to the National Academies. And he has helped in writing critical reports. And Jack is a board member of the ALN, an ALN Senior Fellow, and he has his own consulting company now. And thank you very much, Jack.
So welcome everybody. Thanks to the National Academies, ALN for putting this on. It's been great conversations. I think one thing that really impresses me in all these conversations is if you're an asset manager, you're a person who cares. You know, we're here providing support for others so that they can do their job, and your participation in this, even online, is a testament for that. So it's pretty exciting to be kind of in the choir, talking to people who really find this an interesting topic, and certainly the conversations we've been having, we're talking about how to kind of get that word out there and the appreciation for that. I was going to be presenting with Mike Imany today, who unfortunately is not able to be here. He's helping and attending to a good friend of his that needs his care. But Mike is a great guy, and many of you know him. A quick little aside with Mike, it's a testament of kind of a guy who cares. If you're in the Pentagon walking with Mike and you want to get anywhere, don't walk with Mike, because I think everybody knows him. You can't get anywhere fast when you're walking with Mike. But we do have Pete Lufkin, who is also another author and a committee member of the report, here with us today. Pete, if you want to wave so people see who you are. Yeah, so Pete was really the mastermind for Chapter 4, which got into some of the mechanics of analysis, economics. He's an economist by training. I'm always learning something new when I talk to Pete. So he's another resource here for you to talk to. If you know me, you know that I like talking about asset management, and we're going to talk about this report. The report was commissioned by the Federal Facilities Council, which is a body within the National Academies. It serves under the Board of Infrastructure and Constructed Environment, which I also am happily a member of, and then under the aegis of the National Academy. So there's a lot of cool things that happen here. If you're in the building, take a look around. Some of the artwork is pretty cool. It's a great resource for the federal government and the legislative branch, and that's what we do here. This report is really another report in a series of about a whole bunch of reports. These covers are all National Academies reports that basically provide a lineage of information about facility asset management. A lot of highlights and things that we know and we use as general practice today have originated in this. The 2 to 4% of PRV came from one of these reports. The Federal Property Council was basically established through recommendations of one of these reports that laid out the framework and the mission of what the Federal Property Council is to do, which has now been enacted into law as an active body. The builder SMS, the implementation in DOD, I think really can trace its roots to a National Academies report. So basically, these reports have over the years been effective. The reports generally don't try to break new ground. They really try to consolidate on the understanding that's happening in the industry and to say, hey, this is a good hold point. Let's move forward. So we're really appreciative of like GAO and others making use of the reports, and it's a great interrelationship. In fact, we talk to GAO often while we're writing these reports, which was very helpful for us. The topic of asset management is a big topic. If anybody says they invented it, they don't know what they're talking about. It's basically a continuation of a thought process that's been ongoing. It's actually a response to understanding how information is being used and how decision making is being made. It was really exciting to hear the UN and GAO talk about structure and activities and objectives and methodologies and the learning process. So I think today, is all the asset management things figured out? Absolutely not. We're still figuring it out. In fact, in some respects, we can look at it as really kind of a new discipline in the conversation. So part of the challenges that we're dealing with and what we're hearing about is really just people trying to understand, well, what is this? I mean, I manage assets. Are you telling me I'm not doing my job? And we have to kind of get through all that. And that's part of a conversation. That's really what we're doing here. We'll hit a number of points on this, but to say it's a shared experience. It's an experience, and I think the UN really kind of highlighted that across the world. People have assets. People who manage those assets care about those assets and what they're trying to achieve, and they're trying to figure out how to do that. So it's really just part of the continuation of that conversation. The problem to be solved was, and we look at that lineage of reports, was recognizing that is we got a lot of broken stuff and they need to be worked on. The deferred maintenance conversation has been part of that. The GAO has recognized federal facilities as part of the high risk list, which if you do any research or looking at the history of that high risk list is actually really interesting. In fact, it's a major achievement of GAO just to recognize we need to pull these things into a list that can be recognizable. They're named. We can now go back and review those things. That's all part of the process of really problem-solving decision-making, and asset management really accounts for all of that. The challenge we had when we were commissioned the report as the authors was, okay, we know the story. In fact, look at the last 30 years, we've been talking about this story. And if you read those reports from front to back, which I can say I have done that, it's very repetitive, actually. In a way, it's almost kind of frustrating because you keep hearing the same story again and again. And like, well, what needs to be done differently? And that was our charge with this report. They asked us how to take that next step. And it was challenging for the committee to figure that out. One of the aspects is first of all, we had to define like what the problem is. We ended up rallying around the word renewal. The way we use renewal isn't just make things new, it's really a systematic renewal of the portfolio. So what we're looking to do is elevate the understanding. It's not about assets. It's actually about supporting the mission in a sustainable way, but also anticipating the changes that have to happen in the operating environment. So renewal, and we introduce this in the report, is really trying to elevate the conversation to be something a little bit more than just, fixing something that's broken. In terms of deferred maintenance, which I know is a focus aspect here, the report does make a statement that it's a lagging indicator. It's really a symptom of a bigger problem. This report focused on the root cause and how to solve that problem, recognizing that deferred maintenance is a symptom of that. There's many other symptoms of that. Mike pointed out, and it's in many GAO reports, which by the way, I think we referenced and made use of over 60 individual GAO reports in the research to get ready to produce this report. We can talk about deferred maintenance, but we have to find a way to solve that, and that's what this report is really trying to focus on. When we the first step, and I was just started this thought on the previous slide, was the definition of renewal. Talked about the definition of renewal. We looked to elevate it. One of the things that was really helpful in us appreciating the fact that there's different ways of thinking of things was a paper from ISO, International Standards Organization, and it introduces or discusses the perspectives of asset management and managing assets. Now, in a standards world, those are technical terms and they have specific meanings. Generally speaking, they sound kind of the same, and we're trying to figure that out. But I think what this paper does, and what we found as a committee that was really helpful, was it challenged us to think about, if you're thinking about it in a different way, would you come up with a different answer? We even at one point evoked Einstein's comment of, insanity, but I think we chose a different one, with something more along the lines like, we developed the problems that we're trying to solve. The way we have to solve them is thinking differently. Something to that effect, and Einstein's really good for that. Even if he didn't say all that stuff, it's still kind of an example of, hey, let's think a little bit differently. We did that, and we started internalizing what does that mean. The how-to was, how do we get and elevate the conversation into a different way of thinking of things. This perspective, managing assets and asset management, is good. Daniel's points earlier on the UN, I think, really kind of talk about When you're talking to those communities that are trying to figure out what to do, you really, the passion is coming from the services that are being provided, the improvements in health and all that. That's where the passion comes from. It's really not about the facilities. The asset management is the business end of that. How do the resources go there? How do you make those priorities? How do you do the trade-offs, which is a really difficult thing to do? The managing assets, I mean, and I'm an engineer, we figured that out already. We know, engineers, architects, planners, they know what to do. They know how to do that kind of stuff. The challenge is trying to get these two conversations to happen at once to understand how all that comes together. That's the problem we were trying to solve. We developed this report over COVID, which gave us the advantage of about 18 months of a vortex of thought. It gave us time to read a lot of the materials that were there. One of the sources we went to is OMB, and we're talking to some senior directors at OMB, and they said, this is great, this asset management stuff, but have you read our policy? It already covers all that stuff, and it was a challenge. We said, no, we just know it. We have to follow these rules as a federal employee or a federal agency, but when you read that, we found that there were missing parts in the policy. This report goes through and does a very detailed, one could even say an exhaustive analysis of federal policy to find exactly what are the flawed points. And the recommendations start identifying the steps that need to be done and taken to address those. It doesn't necessarily say, just do this, it's a simple formula. It's really a thought process that has to happen in order to make a difference. Those recommendations are listed here. They kind of go along the lines of this. You need a system, you need an approach, you need rules of the game on how to understand things. That's recommendation number 1, facility asset management system. It builds very heavily on GAO 1957, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Really kind of set up the stage for, hey, let's take a look at these things. This is a way to start framing things. With the National Academies, we took the next step. And Mike, I think your answer was a very good answer about, hey, where's ISO 55000 come in? The National Academy says it is part of the answer. If you want a source that's going to tell you the rules of the game and the structures of how organizations behave in terms of a thought process, there is absolutely no better source available than the management system standards, and ISO 55000 focuses on management of value. There's a lot of other standards in that series that talk about the quality management. ISO 9000 is one that probably a lot of people are familiar with. They all kind of have the same thought process, and they all do a little bit different things. We make that point. Inherent to that is some of the specific recommendations and some technical details on that. But as an example, the federal government has no balance sheet on their physical assets. What is the requirements? We have deferred maintenance, but then what are the real requirements and what these need to be performed? We know that there's misconnects, there's excess property, but there's no actual statement that actually reconciles that. Like, let's go have an auditor verify that this information is correct. Things along those lines. The accounting system is actually broken. You cannot produce a balance sheet with the federal accounting system. So this report makes specific recommendations to both legislative branch and to the executive branch, specifically OMB, that you have to do things differently. Otherwise, they're going to end up saying the same thing. Number 2 is have a plan. Everybody needs to have a plan, get started, figure out where you think you might be going. And there's OMB content that covers that in detail. OMB Circular A11, which is about the development and execution of the federal budget, is actually a very good document in this stuff. There's a capital programming guide at the end, which is the business end, that says how do you pull this stuff together. It actually requires agencies to have a plan. We're supporting that, and we're saying just take it a little bit more to talk about this kind of business sheet, business case analysis, and what you're doing. Have a strategy. 3 is have a strategy. Have a plan, but know where you're going, which is also anticipate and prepare for what's going to happen next. Know that things are pretty fluid. Know that there's competing interests. Know that there's other things that happen. So you have to have a strategy that kind of helps you keep looking at the horizon moving forward and helps you make adjustments. 4, which is recommendation number 4, but also kind of correlates with chapter 4, which Pete Lufkin can talk more about in great detail, is there's a desperate need for better data, information, models, analysis. In fact, when we go back to the managing assets and asset management, a lot of what we know today, deferred maintenance as an example, condition index, space analysis, are really more of a managing asset stuff. There's other metrics that have to be evaluated on trade-offs. Like, how do you actually compare these things? An example in DoD is, am I spending money on mission or on housing? On wellness or mission, operations. It's not easy to make those trade-offs, but somebody has to do that. And that has to be a conversation, and there's a way to do that. That's what asset management is really all about. Number 5 is in the end, really, those 4 recommendations have been stated many times over. The number 5 recommendation I call the so what recommendation. So what? For the last 30 years, smart people have looked at this problem and have kind of come up with a consistent pattern of how to solve the problem. But unless there's actual real legislative changes on how this happens, there's nothing the federal agency can do. You have to follow the rules. You have to put the information in the way you need to do it. You have to show that you're spending the money on the authorized purposes, but there is no requirement. In fact, there's no actual incentive to actually try to be a good asset manager, be a good steward. That requires legislative change. So one of the things that the National Academies stands for, and really recommendation number 5's foot stomps is, in order for this to be different, the rules of the game have to change a little bit, and that is a legislative responsibility. So until that happens, we're going to do the best that we can, really. How to move forward? Well, to move forward is, first of all, the policies and the procedures that we have, and many of those are listed here from the previous slide, and when we said there's some problems, are actually really good. I can say from my own experience in the Coast Guard, was there for 20 years. I came back later as a consultant supporting the Coast Guard. It was the first time when I actually read our policy. And I felt like, holy crap, if I had read this, I would have been a lot more helpful in understanding how the organization works and how to make decisions. But it coming back to have to go through that process. But the thing is there's the mechanics of asset management. We talked that earlier slide with the time frame. We all know how to do this. We're all doing our best to do that. One of the it's kind of like a crowd pleaser, but it's because it's true. I like to say that this stuff's easy, except for the people. And really, that's all about communications. And what the ISO management system structure and all this stuff information is really about communicating, to understand what are you talking about when you say that's a priority. Have we figured out how to put that together? Those blocking and tackling activities are really the foundation for asset management. Whether you want to think about ISO 55000 or not, doesn't matter. They're all going to kind of move in that direction. So the recommendations that we have is, we call it a bold new approach. We actually use those words because we do think that there's something radical about how to do this. You have to think about the problem differently if you're thinking and hoping for a different outcome. And if we look at the last 30 years, if we do things consistently, the next 30 years are going to be the same story. And this report's really trying to provide an insight on how to take those steps. A couple aspects here, I think where it really drives home. There's a number of OMB circulars. Many of you are familiar with those. The budget and execution is kind of like how do you manage the budget, the capital program guide specifically. And there's specific aspects of that. It's actually the real property capital plan, the strategic plan, stuff like that. That has to be reconciled with strategy, budget, and programs. And there's like a 3-legged stool there. If you don't connect those dots and reconcile those in a single report signed by a single authority, you're never going to actually figure out what your priorities are. There's always going to be something else to do. That's OMB Circle A11. A123 is risk management, which means you have to start understanding the trade-offs. Once you have that picture, you have to start figuring out, well, is it wellness, climate, or operations? Like, how do we balance that? That's a mature conversation. That's an executive level conversation. If you ask as an executive to do something and you're not supporting it and it's not funded, it's an aspirational goal. It doesn't really mean anything. It just means that your middle management is going to be trying to figure that out, and the people who actually do the work are just going to be incredibly frustrated. That's recognizing that communications is poor. So the asset management story is really about figuring out how to have that conversation. It also means learning some new terminology, some new steps, things of that matter. That's OMB Circular A123. A136 is the financial statements. That's accountability. The CFO Act came through and said, hey, we're going to have a CFO Act and there's going to be people sign off on a financial statement. That's a CFO. The CFO right now, it's kind of impressive, has to sign off on all the financials. And I said earlier, there's no balance sheet for physical assets, particularly real property. Both those statements are true. The CFO, when they're signing the CFO Act, is basically certifying that the dollars appropriated are spent on the authorized legal purpose. This is going to go to maintenance. This is going to go to fuel. This is going to go to something else. It's all short terms. There's nothing that looks at, did that asset actually perform what it needs to, and does it need help, renewal, that kind of stuff. So the accountability is basically built on this philosophy of asset management that establishes that, but it goes back to that point to the legislative branch. If they're not making changes to laws that are allowing federal agencies to be the good stewards that they know how to be, it's not going to happen. And this is kind of the kicker. If there isn't a person who's signing off on the reconciliation of strategy, budget, and programs that can be fired because they either made a bad decision, misunderstood something that they're supposed to understand, or chose to ignore something that they really shouldn't ignore, it doesn't happen. So the report, in a bold new way, is basically saying stuff that we're not unaware of and we're not familiar with, but we're saying in order for it to happen, there has to be changes, and changes are required from the top. On the right-hand side are a list of principles that are listed in the report. I think that's probably from a federal agency standpoint, like the action orders. You're just trying to be introduced to asset management or kind of want to think about how well you're doing. These principles were written to be assisting others in that. Well, let's take a look at things. Data integrity, this list of things would be recognizable to anybody sitting in the room or online. And it's just a starting point. The recommendation also goes over to GAO, say, hey, these are tools. If you want to go out and evaluate a federal agency, these are places to look. Start looking at that balance sheet analysis principle and see if that's actually being used in practice. Now, again, federal agencies can't do everything that they want to do, but there's a way that you have to get it started. And some of that means a little bit of pain. I mean, I'll say as an example, New Year's resolutions, I want to lose 10 pounds again. And the pain I feel is my pants are a little bit tighter than I want them to be. So now I have to do something about that. There has to be some type of feel to what you're doing here and why you're doing it. But it also means you have to change what you're doing. And that's, in some respects, really kind of the hardest part. A couple last points and then open up for questions. On the left-hand side is the performance management cycle. There's a section in OMB Circular A11 that talks about this. This is the outgrowth of GIPRA. We've all heard of GIPRA and feel that, but it's a really good document. I mean, if you want at a federal agency level just to figure out the philosophy and the thought process, the motivations behind what performance management is all about, this is a really good document. It reinforces and aligns with ISO 55000 things like have objectives, make them smart, apply them, have a conversation with people until they understand what these objectives are. It's all right there. And this is governing policy for all federal agencies. The middle point is a graphic that was introduced in strategies. It's a framework. Lay it out there. How do we have this conversation? Where do things happen? When do people participate? What to expect? What's that flow of communications? One aspect of this framework, and it's to point out, it's not a criticism of the characteristics of the GAO report, but I think the characteristics of the GAO report really provided the impetus for us to take this next step. A framework as a management system, one of the things that tells is, does it have a feedback loop? It's a continuous system. So like an electrical schematic, if somebody's talking about an asset management system or framework, and you want to say that this is actually something that kind of stands up to the ISO 55000 rigor, that's one of the immediate things you look for. Is there a feedback loop? That kind of stuff. The button on top there is there's an external environment, and we're part of that. The asset management activity is part of that. and you have to talk to those people to find out what's going on. That's all part of that. On the right is a line of sight. It's basically pretty common to what almost every agency has. There's a strategic plan, there's capital plans, there's budget activities that happen, you execute things, and then you tell somebody about it and try to do better next year. So again, that's also a framework in terms of communication. So again, these pieces are things that are out there. What strategy sought to do was to evaluate the how to do it. And we tried to be clear on exactly how to do that. Those 5 recommendations are really written for a more kind of executive level community to say, wake up and do something and, kind of put your money where your mouth is. Because you do have a lot of asset managers who are trying to do the job. They know what to do. If only they had the means or ability to do that. And in some respects, that is involving the authorities that are available to them. Even the ability to do trade-offs between capital dollars and maintenance dollars. Right now, they're all kind of stovepiped out, and it's really difficult to do those kind of things. A couple last points here. DoD, for example, who's about 2/3 of the footprint, is making use of this in different ways. The word that's being talked about a lot now is optimization. And optimization is just really another word for asset management, trying to figure out how decisions are being made. This is 3 of the principles in the document, and talks a little bit about the relationship. But the operational readiness is there's some higher level objective that needs to be achieved, and there's inputs to that. There's mission alignment. What do you need to do? What are your priorities? What are the things you're doing? And then facility performance, in this case, it's facility assets, is there certain metrics. So these 3 principles really kind of work as a combination of things to help decision makers. The report includes this type of information to provide some assistance to federal agencies. One more principle is this principle. This comes from a number of different people. One of the people, Emily Herndon, is very active in this use of this principle as well. Army Corps, I think, is really kind of the originating source. Is have some type of schematic to balance things out. Communications. This is about communicating information, sharing information, connecting things, but correlating risk, and actually, to some respect, monetizing risk, because if it's going to be relevant to the budget discussion, you have to get it on the budget sheet somehow. So again, 2 more principles, or actually 3 more principles here that are kind of connecting the dots on how to go about doing that. Final thoughts. Federal agencies, our report was commissioned by the Federal Facilities Council, which is a member body here at the National Academies, made up of federal agencies. And they were like, we're tired of trying to solve this problem. Do you got any good ideas? That's how we started the process. What we recognize, it's really not your fault. You know how to do this. There's no doubt about what it takes to manage assets and the expertise and requirements to do that. Federal agencies have demonstrated that time and time again. Yet there's always opportunities for improvement, and GAO could list probably many of those. That's okay. But the thing is but it's still in your power to make a difference. You still have to step up to the plate and still do what you need to do to be better managers. As asset managers, we're people who care. Our jobs aren't just doing our job. Sometimes it is, and I've had those jobs too. But really, collectively as asset managers, we're people who care. So we're going to want to try to do things. This report tries to provide some insights to do that. Again, won't go, it's not a presentation on ISO 55000, but basically it's solved. I mean, the way a management system behaves and operates has been figured out. That Chevron progression talks about major amounts of sources that have basically brought us to today and understanding that disciplined asset management is a thing. Office of Management Budget, they have a job to do. They execute the budget. It would be nice, I'd say, it would be nice if I think they took a more leadership role in this. I think there's opportunities for them to lead, and I think we look forward to that happening. Their policies are what guide federal agencies. There's opportunities to introduce, behavioral aspects, thought processes that I think for many of the agencies, particularly smaller agencies, would really benefit from. So we look forward to them continuing to do their job, and we also look forward to them to helping step up to a little bit more of a leadership role in helping us all be better asset managers. And we also thought that GAO could also make some improvements too. One idea comes to mind on the deferred maintenance as an opportunity of like the future at-risk list. You know, it's a lagging indicator. We kind of know that story. I think maybe there's a way to frame it, not necessarily change the subject, but frame it that could be maybe a little bit more action oriented, like the business case. I think the application of those 11 principles at any agencies would show very clearly that there's big gaping holes in the capabilities at agencies. They really kind of come together into this business case type of analysis. And maybe that's a thought to consider. I mean, it's not specifically stated that way in the report, but we're all in this together, basically. And I think, you know, all of us, myself particularly, appreciate the work that, that GAO does in this area. In fact, we use most of your reports. They're all very well done. So thank you for that. But those are, I guess, quick synopsis of the report. I don't know if we have any time.
I can't thank you enough for this comprehensive assessment of where we're at and where we can go. So thank you to the National Academies and for doing the strategies report, and thank you for this excellent presentation on it. So let's hear for Jack. And before I bring the microphone out to the audience, I'm going to ask Jack Kelly to comment. I see Amelia wants to say something. I am going to read a question from Bob Leach, who was at the Army Corps. You mentioned the work that they have done, and he's now at Woolport, and he's consulting to federal agencies on asset management. He has said similar discussions have occurred regarding a national infrastructure strategy as these recommend. Similar discussions have occurred regarding a national infrastructure strategies as these recommendations. The trouble seems to be a serious lack of appetite or reluctance to engage the problem. No real long-term national visions and an assumption that the future will be able to pay for the sins of the present. How will these recommendations overcome all of that? I think you've kind of addressed that in terms of requesting OMB to get more involved, but I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, I think in recommendation number 3, it talks to that. There's OMB policy that says, let's have some national strategies and stuff like that. And I think they've made valiant efforts to try to cobble something together. It is recognizably difficult because you have a federal agency who's really a federation of agencies that have different missions that don't have to be reconciled into a common national strategy. So it is something of a challenge recognizably. But I think it kind of comes back to vocabulary and understanding that there's different ways of thinking things. And this report here, or this article, is the most downloaded article on the ISO technical committee that manages the standard. And it has been you know, used as a conversation starter many times over. I think it's a great way to do that. But I think, and of course, Bob's work is just fantastic, and really have enjoyed all the time spending with Bob. Look forward to seeing him here in a couple of weeks. But I think it kind of comes down to basic things, vocabulary, and I think this is a good way to start that. I know the committee that wrote this report used this understanding as kind of like a stage setter for the conversations that we had. And we found that thought process to be very helpful in trying to take that conversation forward. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think it all starts with, we just pick up the rope and start pulling on it. Eventually things start moving.
Is this on? Okay, so one thing, your 11 facility asset management principles, I think they fit directly within the asset management framework that we developed. So I think there's a nice fit with the 6 key characteristics.
Yep.
And I think that I don't work at GAO, but I think that GAO should be able to incorporate them. So I like your suggestion about that. But I also wanted to mention you have 5 recommendations to OMB, and GAO has also made many recommendations to OMB. And you know, what we have found is that OMB either didn't comment or hasn't implemented them. However, we did have one report, GAO 21596 on climate, and that came out in 2021. during the pandemic, so it may not have gotten a lot of attention. But in that case, because it was sent for Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, there was congressional legislation.
Mhm.
So I believe that in some cases, you are going to need legislation.
I absolutely agree. And that was a finding or recommendation number 5 really kind of highlights that it's a so what recommendation. So what? If we don't change the way that the money is being allocated or appropriated, and like a simple answer is if agencies had a little bit more flexibility to balance their capital and operating expense accounts, they could make a lot of good happen with no more new money. You know, it's those limiting factors, and there's many others. I mean, the accounting structure is also another area. One compliment to 1957, and I was always very impressed by this after reading many GAO reports, is there's one recommendation, only one, not 2, not more. And I think that recommendation, and I think is very helpful because it really shows a light on, you know, and I think by extension, it talks about this is a process, a thought process. We have to be involved in it. We have to understand what's going on. There are resources that we can use. And I think there's a lot more of this asset management story that still needs to be told. So thank you.
Hi, I have Diane Tucker from Commerce. I wanted to talk about the real property capital plan. And the capital plan is, my understanding, because we've just turned them in and they're the final ones are due in March, is that it's capital. We talk about prioritization, we talk about alternative analysis, we do talk about life cycle costs. What the plans currently, they're silent, I think, on deferred maintenance, and they're silent on risk making decisions, that trade-off you're talking about in between, how do I balance performing the mission versus, you know, maintaining my facilities. So I'm curious, you know, with the GAO report on deferred maintenance and the potential for that becoming a high risk item, whether or not, and I know, I don't know if OMB is on virtual today or not, just something that, dare I say, asking for more work, that we expand the real property capital plan to include the deferred maintenance aspect of it and the risk decision making.
I think that's a great point. And one thing is, as a clarification, when you go and read the capital programming guide in OMB, and this is where words matter, and this is kind of technical language, it's not capital dollars, it's capital assets, which covers the entire life cycle. And in that guide, and this comes from OMB, so as much as we can, you know, throw mud at OMB saying, hey, it could be you do things better, that guide is a really good guide. And it does talk about, you know, I think current edition is like 3 stages of how things work. You have the, I got to get the asset, I have to manage the asset, then I have to get rid of the asset stages. And it talks about specifics related to that. The capital, real property capital plan, which is listed there in some OMB memos and being reinforced, is steps that are being made to try to better do that. And I think there's just really a lot of misunderstandings, or really not understanding what's actually being stated in OMB policy. And I can understand that they can have some frustration, like, yeah, it's all right here. Why aren't we following this type of stuff? I do think there's more that can be done. In the Department of Commerce, and I'm sure you're probably aware of this, the National Academies did a NIST report, and we applied strategies as a construct to evaluate effectively the real property capital plan of NIST. And that was taking this kind of theoretical level down to a more tactical level and applying it. You know, the elements of what strategies talks about are all represented in that plan. In fact, I had the nice opportunity to actually be a member of both of those committees when we were developing that report. So it was interesting to see how that thought process was going. I think the element about what that is, and I think it kind of speaks to, we can talk about deferred maintenance, is to develop a better understanding of performance metrics. And Pete Lufkin in chapter 4 of strategies, you know, provides some depth of understanding of just how to do some of the mechanics of that. But that narrative has to be developed. And I think as agencies, having been a Fed for a while myself, you know, we're kind of still learning how to do that. And so I think deferred maintenance is part of that conversation. It's great that GAO is providing a platform to highlight that. But I think we have to recognize that deferred maintenance is a symptom of the problem. And I would be hopeful that there's more work that gets done to try to address more root cause issues. And we believe that these 5 recommendations capture what needs to be done in terms of a higher level thought process.
And I don't know if Skip Vaughn is on the line from NIST, but we are very, very appreciative of Commerce on the National Academy study that was done on NIST, because it did shed an awful lot of light onto how facility maintenance can have a positive impact on mission. And when you don't make the investment, the reverse. So thank you very much for your participation in that. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to Commerce and Skip and NIST to support that. I know they had a lot to do with making that report full.
Now I'd like Jack Kelly, who was with OMB for 36 years and is an ALM board member, to make some questions or comments.
Thanks. And by the way, Jack, thank you for that amazing summarization of that impressive body of work. I don't know anybody else who could have done as good a job as you did. So thank you. Yeah, so OMB gets blamed for a lot of stuff, and justifiably so. Probably not blamed for all we should get blamed for. I spent 36 years at OMB, and half of it on the budget side, half on the management side. And one of the things I learned, to my dismay early on, is that OMB believes that its job is to issue policy and then walk away. And it's up to agencies to figure out what to do with that. You talk about a feedback loop, like, did the policy work and how can we make it better? OMB has no concept of that. Or if they do, it's not something they think is their job. They, honest to God, don't. And that's hugely frustrating to me. So I'll give you an example of being an odd duck. I actually took a GAO report because I like GAO. I think they do amazing work. I took one of their reports on the mismanagement of government aircraft and turned it into an OMB circular, which is a way that OMB actually, and it basically set up an implementation schema that is self-regulating, self-governing. So it puts the agencies in charge of figuring out what the policy should be in that area. So, but the federal government, though, has 2 other big problems that OMB can't solve, in one case won't solve. One, we have what we call a unified budget, which makes capital money compete with operating money. And that's a trade-off that's always going to be disadvantaged to capital. So that's problem 1. Problem 2, how can I say this? Problem 2 is within the federal government, and I think this is not unique to the federal government, is we have like we in our own minds, we split real property from personal property. And yet, what we don't do a good enough job of is thinking about both classes of properties as assets that have to work together to accomplish mission. And so ignoring the impact of personal property on real property and vice versa is something that we need to work through and do better on. If you take a look at, we talked about certifying to ISO 55000. If you look at the organizations that have been certified to ISO 55000, they talk about the scope of their asset management systems. In every case I have seen, the scopes focus on personal property. Because if you think about mission critical, you don't think of, you should be thinking about the building, but it's what's going on in that building that is mission critical. So the building has to support what goes on in it, which is one of my complaints. I used to be the examiner for GSA for everything but the public building service. They didn't trust me with the public building service, and for good reason. What disturbed me about GSA's, it's what it did with its headquarters. It created space that was designed to reduce the footprint. It wasn't designed to support the work that had to go on in that space, and that's a fundamental flaw. The other thing about when OMB was talking about freeze the footprint, The early freeze the footprint stuff is like, well, we know how to count beans, so we can count the beans associated with square feet. No discussion whatsoever on mission implication. And that's just, that's not very bright, folks. So anyway, I think I'm done.
Thank you very much. Jack, do you want to make any response to that?
No, I think, I mean, if anybody knows Jack Kelly, he's a font of information. I think you even had some fingerprints on the executive order 13327 that got things rolling. So, I mean, I'm always fascinated on the history of things, of how things kind of end up where they are and where they're going. And it's really interesting to learn, the challenges that we've had to do. Some of them we've solved, some of them we've solved multiple times. Some of them we still haven't really figured out yet. But I think that's really part of the asset management story. And certainly events like this, coming together, sharing this information, meeting other people who have kind of common interests in this and learning together. So Jack, thanks for everything that you've done and what you're continuing to do. And I appreciate those comments. I think they are very reflective of the asset management story that we're all learning about and trying to do something with.
And Nick, if you can bring the microphone, please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Karen Moore from NASA. I'm at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in PG County. And I can assure you at the facility level, we're doing these things. We're identifying assets. We're looking at deferred maintenance. We've developed an objective system to decide what we're going to invest in or want to invest in and what we're going to offload and what's going to be deferred. We're doing this best practices at the facility level. What's not happening is translating to the agency level, because when we go to the agency, which is over there somewhere, they don't want to hear about our problems. They want happy talk. They want to know how we're going to get rocks from Mars, what probes we're going to be launching. They don't want to know that the floods where we're trying to build these probes are flooding. Okay, we are having problems translating from the ground up to the agency and then to Congress.
Mhm.
And so we run into these roadblocks and then nothing gets done because only happy talk is going to go to the 9th floor and then to the Hill. So we have those plans, they're just not going anywhere.
That's
So-
why we're the Asset Leadership Network. Jim Dieter has wisely said years ago, it's not that we don't know how to maintain our bridges. We know how to do that, as Jack said. Our leadership isn't marshaling the will of the people to address the challenging issues. And I was going to say later, so I'll let Jack comment later, but one of the things that we're going to be doing in 2024 starts tomorrow. We're going to Capitol Hill and we're bringing the report and we're pointing out to senators and representatives what is important in the report to put in as a simple statement to actually move the ball forward. We're asking them to reach out to USAID and the State Department and other Treasury, other agencies that can help with the United Nations initiatives that align with US interests. So we can do that because we're a nonprofit. So thank you for creating the documents that allow us to go to the Hill and try to address these issues.
Yeah, I mean, if the agency, my agency's leadership was required to do better reporting, the information could flow up from the facilities, and we have facilities all over the United States, the largest one being Goddard. If there was policy to say, hey, you have to report this, you have to prioritize this, they couldn't just rush off the recommendations that are flowing up from the facilities.
Jack, I'll
But
let you take
Right
that
now, it feels like they can just ignore what we're saying.
softball for some of the things that I know you can address.
Well, I think the balance sheet analysis is one of the principles that brought up, and that was with the intent that it provides requirements that you can't sweep things under the rug. There has to be a reporting of not just, how much money I have and what my deferred maintenance is, but the impact of this deferred maintenance on mission. I'd point to the two reports from the National Academies, one on NIH and the one on NIST that we just talked about, as I think an evolving thought process of how at an agency level to actually establish the business case, because it's a very delicate topic and there's a lot of competing interests and ideas. But I think with the asset management, kind of basic steps that we're describing provides a way to have that conversation where people are invited to be part of that, to contribute. It's not, try to avoid the adversarial aspect, but to kind of have that. Strategies was a challenge from the Federal Facilities Council to say, that's great. We don't want you to admire the problem anymore. We kind of know what the problem is, and challenge us to do some of the how-to. And the how-to really was basically a mirror back on leadership. If you want something to happen differently, you're going to have to start doing something differently. And I think I really appreciate what you're saying about Goddard, and of course, representing that level of asset management. I mean, that's all the work's getting done there, and people effectively know how to do what they need to do. They just need a little bit of help in getting others to understand how that contributes to mission.
Okay, so a couple more comments from online, because there's a real active community there. And also Senator Durbin's office called this morning, and I briefly described what we're doing here. They're very excited to hear from us. Just so you know, it's working already. So maybe we can get that going. And Senator Lumen's office just sent confirmation for a meeting. So Bob Leach has follow-up, and basically it's a statement that is maybe renaming it Real Property Capital Asset Plan would encourage agencies to embrace a life cycle view, total cost of ownership that included deferred maintenance as well as sustainability. And that's just it's not a question, that's a great statement. And then we have someone from West Bengal who has been very active, and he has gratitude for this great presentation and wonders if it is required to take resilience as a parameter for valuation of asset management. And I'm just going to say yes.